So thank you everyone for joining us and welcome. My name is Sarah. I am the case manager counselor here at CDRU, and I am joined by Courtney, who is our MSW intern. And then we have Dr. Marzio, who is our third component of SHAW, Student Health and Wellness here, and he's the school psychologist. And so July is recognized as BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month and is also formally recognized as B.B. Moore Campbell Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. B.B. Moore Campbell was a mental health advocate who, quote, sought to highlight and change the systemic and structural deficits of the mental health system that prevented care for BIPOC individuals living with mental health conditions. She is one of the original founders of what is now recognized as NAMI Urban Los Angeles. To learn more about her and her incredible work, check out her impact on the Mental Health America website, mhanational.org. Shaw felt it was necessary to address this large and important topic for several reasons. The main one being that CDU's history, values, and mission align with the spirit of the work that B.B. Moore Campbell did in her lifetime, in that both seek to raise awareness of healthcare disparities in underrepresented communities and work to eliminate those disparities. CDU is designed to not only educate BIPOC individuals in a largely BIPOC community, but also encourages these individuals to go back to their communities and share what they've learned. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panel. First, we have Dr. Trang Huang, who is the Senior Advisor for Special Services for Groups. Dr. Trang is a licensed clinical social worker with a doctorate from UCLA School of Public Policy and Planning and has 30 years of experience working in the mental health system in Los Angeles and with the AAPI communities. Most recently with the SSG Alliance programs, she has worked overseas in refugee camps in the Philippines and conducted social work training in Vietnam and the Asia Pacific region. She is an adjunct faculty at the USC Dworak Peck School of Social Work, teaching foundation courses. Thank you for being here, Dr. Trang. Next, we have Dr. Nithya Ravindran, apologies. Dr. Ravindran is a child and adolescent psychologist and assistant professor of psychology and the associate training director for the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Fellowship at CDU. She completed medical school at Michigan State University after she trained in adult psychiatry and child and adolescent psychiatry at Tulane University. Dr. Ravindran draws inspiration from a variety of sources, including psychodynamic and attachment theories, narrative medicine, art, music, and storytelling traditions, and Eastern healing and wellness practices. Her passions broadly involve creating and modulating health systems with an emphasis on equity and inclusion, and training the next generation of psychiatrists to be compassionate, thoughtful, and just healers. Next, we have Dr. Eric James Escareño. Dr. Escareño works at APLA Health and identifies as a two-spirited indigenous Yavapai Apache and Chiricahua Apache, Los Angelino, fueled by social justice and perpetuating meaningful change. Having expertise in the field of mental health, Dr. Escareño specializes in interventions for LGBTQ+ and deaf folks, HIV advocacy, BDSM advocacy education, and nonprofit program development. Dr. Escareño has skill sets already aimed at creating purposeful social change and positive disruption of injustice for underserved and underrecognized communities. As a grassroots social impact leader, they embrace strategy and collaboration as the impetus for designing meaningful change. Next, we have Dr. Noé Ruben Chavez. Dr. Chavez is an assistant professor in the Department of Urban Public Health and Psychology program at CDU. Dr. Chavez earned his MA in Social Personality Psychology from UC Riverside and his PhD in Community Psychology from the University of Illinois at Chicago. His research focuses on engaging youth through participatory action approaches to learn about mental health and social justice and become agents of change for improved mental health systems. Dr. Chavez is currently collaborating with the Community Healing and Trauma Prevention Center at the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health in South Los Angeles to create new spaces and resources for youth-centered mental well-being support. Thank you everyone for being on this panel. And lastly, we have our student facilitator, Noemi Gill. Noemi is currently wrapping up a master's in biomedical science at CDU, and she plans to earn an MD with a master's in public health, which she's also hoping to complete at CDU. She's passionate about addressing health disparities in marginalized communities because those are the communities she's a part of, as well as has experienced the loss of too many loved ones to incompetent medical care. Some of her current work includes being a research assistant on studies in South LA and working with the street medic team to conduct health education first aid Skillshare workshops around Los Angeles. She's also in leadership positions in several clubs around campus, including being the president of the Active Minds Club. And during her breaks, you can find her at the beach, a campsite, or stargazing with her boyfriend and their dog, Nala. So with that, Noemi, I hand it off to you.
Thank you so much. And I'm not sure if it's your audio or my Wi-Fi, but it's been a little bit patchy on the intro. So if for some reason I cut out, it might be my Wi-Fi. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But thanks to everybody for being here and for having me. I want to start off with the first question. And for this first question, we'll leave it open to anyone who wants to answer first. Maybe raise your hands and I can call on you one by one. So the question is, with the understanding that in regards to mental health treatment and healthcare in general, practitioners cannot have a cookie cutter approach when it comes to access and treatment of BIPOC communities. So what unique tools and methods do you use in your work to connect with these communities? Like I said, we'll go one by one. You just raise your hands, whoever would like to answer first. Yes, Dr. Chang.
Thank you. I'll go get us started, yeah, to get into the mode. Okay, I wanted to kind of call out for us to really think about the starting out with outreach, to listen, and to identify areas of very specific nuance, needs, and issues within our communities. So in my work, specifically with AAPIs, Asian American Pacific Islanders in Los Angeles County, we have such diversity in terms of cultures and language. So for us, the collaboration is really necessary in order to really reach out to all the different various communities in our midst in LA County. So we find that there's a lot of collaboration. So we have the Asian American Pacific Islander Equity Alliance, which is a body that really functions as a identifying of needs and then also advocate at different levels, at the financial level, at the policy level, at the practice level. We also find that we have to do collaboration between large established entities. For example, SSG ourselves, I'm from SSG and we're a large entity, but there are a lot of community-based organizations that are smaller that have the pulse of the community, and we need to collaborate together. So for example, the API prevention work, so we had this API empowerment project where we have a collaboration of 12 different organizations, small groups like Cambodian Association, Little Tokyo Service Center, South Asian Network, Search to Involve Filipinos. So these are smaller, really ingrained in the different small communities, and we pull together so that they can have access to funding from the Department of Mental Health so that we could do prevention and outreach efforts to really highlight the needs, the mental health needs, but also to connect folks to other types of services. Then we also have, like in the integrated service model, which is an innovative project in mental health, we had to collaborate and then look at new ways to outreach communities. So for example, the Pacific Asian Counseling Services on the West Side, they collaborated with the Cambodian Association and the Long Beach collaboration within the Cambodian communities to really outreach, to provide integrated wraparound services using things like collaborating with the monks with the blessing ceremony as a way to connect spirituality and mental health and needs. And then the Korean American communities work with the faith churches. Mm-hmm. So what our experience is that we have to recognize the diversity and really try to outreach in small connected CBOs so that we can really truly hear and know that we're responsive to the different communities that we work with.
Absolutely. I love that answer. Prevent siloing and collaborate. By CBO, do you mean church-based organization?
Oh, sorry, community-based organizations,
Community.
but also, but we also
Yeah.
work with the faith-based
Faith-based,
communities.
FBO. Okay, cool. Did anyone else like to share? Thank you so much, Dr. Huang, for sharing.
I just wanted to add, I think that was a really comprehensive approach, and I agree with a lot of what Dr. Tran already said. I think from the medical side, we tend to be very cookie cutter in medicine, and as I made my way, I don't know, I wouldn't say psychiatry is fully within medicine. It's sort of its own thing. But as I got to psychiatry, I realized that that doesn't work. Like, you go in with a template and it just never seems to go the way that you think it will. And so I think one of the things personally I've sort of started doing is just being humble and learning and just knowing that I don't know everything all the time. And I think it has helped me just be more open to just learning more. And like Dr. Tran was saying, really listening to community leaders, meeting people where they're at, like who do they trust, and collaborating with that community. And you know, I work with kids. Sometimes I play basketball with them or draw or make art and things like that. So really connecting with people on a level that's not technically or kind of traditionally thought of as medicine or kind of this healing space, but we obviously know that it works. So yeah.
That's beautiful.
Hi, everyone. I suppose some of the tools that I use and I benefit from is storytelling, integrating some of the practices that I would traditionally use at home or in community. And oftentimes I think the science follows, right? Like, I think most oftentimes when people are doing research, they're trying to understand why this works. And then they try to repeat it in a way that's not very useful, which is what ends up happening to be this cookie cutter thing that we have, right? So I think finding more holistic approaches that are not necessarily, when I mean with grace, holistic is not necessarily like outside of the range. It's all care, and utilizing storytelling, sign language, like producing things in their language, and utilizing what those particular types of interventions might be in mental health is extremely important. Where we are currently is not that. What we have is we want evidence-based practices. We want a conveyor belt of production of mental health, and we want to have metrics. And I love metrics. However, the problem is that folks, they want to have like these evidence-based practices that are so individualized that they come out in a different thing. And on a conveyor belt of mental health, that doesn't work, right? We don't put in like individual practices when making cars, right? And it's not going to come out a different car every time. So like, it's either have a cookie cutter or not. And so it's one of those things where I really rely on cultural types of decolonization, as well as re-indigenizing. And indigenousness can be in any kind of capacity, because everyone has indigenous roots to wherever they come from. So it's not so much about always just solely about Native American culture, but more of like, where do people come from and how can they reroot themselves in the culture they come from that they identify with? And so those two concepts are really, really important to be able to separate, because there's those systems, decompressing and understanding and processing systems that play into how we are stressed over generational trauma and historical trauma that's passed on, and then also like rerouting ourselves. There's plenty of people who have been detached from their culture for so long, or desensitized on how that is, and there's an anger, you know, that usually is just kind of in there. So being able to process that in a way of just sitting and rerouting in a way that is hard to be able to produce the same way for every single person. So those are typically some of the tools that I utilize.
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, this is wonderful to be in this panel, and I really appreciate learning from my fellow panelists. And I think I'm not sure if perhaps I'm the only non-clinician on the panel. If everyone else has clinical practice and currently serving, people in that capacity. I'm not trained as a clinician. I'm a trained community psychologist. So I do research, and I didn't specifically start actually in mental health per se. My training was in Chicago. So working with the Mexican immigrant community and understanding, sort of just being there in the community and learning from the dynamics there, and the history. And even though I'm Mexican immigrant myself, but I'm not from Chicago. I'm from the border, from Juarez, El Paso, and there's I think diversity even within different groups, and understanding the history of migration to Chicago, and understanding the current challenges. When I was there, gentrification was already occurring in Pilsen, the neighborhood were adjacent to my university where I was doing my training. So I learned a lot from just being there and working with activists in the community. I learned a lot about the tensions around the perspective of folks in the community organizing and really trying to work towards social justice. In particular, the center where I was working was focused on social justice for immigrants. Unfortunately, it wasn't able to survive the gentrification and displacement, and so they closed down the center and actually painted over the mural that was portraying the history of the Chicano movement and the Mexican immigrant experience in Pilsen, and then they painted over it, and then the building became condominiums that were not affordable for most people that are sort of grew up there in Pilsen, that are from there. And then they managed to repaint the mural, but it was a different mural, and it was done differently. And they, I guess, negotiated with the real estate developers to be able to fund and support a children's art program, but not affordable units, right? So then they did not create that. And I say this because a lot of my approach in the work that I do is really centered on understanding dynamics in the community and how people organize, and not just specifically on mental health. Mental health is impacted by so many factors. And so I think understanding how to improve mental health services is what everyone else is saying here, in terms of thinking of being, humble and going outside of traditional medical practices, thinking of decolonizing our way of understanding healthcare, mental health in particular, and really working collaboratively with communities at different levels, different stakeholders, to understand really what are the issues that are most impactful for people. And it's multiple things that oftentimes we don't do a great job within the medical system or traditional mental health services to address. And I think it's like the evidence-based, what Dr. Escarena, I appreciate mentioning that tension between evidence-based practice and practice-based evidence. And my training as a community psychologist, and there are colleagues that I have that were trained jointly as clinical community psychologists, and practicing and delivering services in ways that sort of reflect more of these concepts that are brought up in thinking, challenging the traditional systems, and rethinking how do we come up with new approaches that are more innovative, that are grounded in the history of the community. So yeah, storytelling, and I think really for me, my work is based on working with young people, youth, and building their capacity to become like peer leaders or educators and advocates for challenging the systems, and creating new resources and spaces, whether in their schools or community settings, where they can help each other out, right, and support one another, finding new ways. I think it's obviously psychotherapy is needed and medication sometimes is needed, but you need to kind of think about other approaches, and then including youth and community members into helping us really come up with better approaches.
Yes, I'm loving all these answers. All these responses are amazing. The next question, I'm really interested in hearing the responses to, is in your experience, how has being part of the BIPOC community helped the work that you do? And have you noticed any downsides?
Yes, I've had tons of downsides. There's an interesting dynamic of having to be inside outside of my own community, and being also exploited by many agencies and companies that want access to these communities. So it's a very tenuous rope. My grandfather looked at me and he doesn't, my auntie was upset that I had shared this. But the truth is, he looked at me when going to college and said, "You're going to become the white devil." And I told him I have to know what they know in order to like do something different, right? And a lot of my message hasn't changed in regards to social justice or my community or any of those things, but there has been a clear division of whether I'm inside or outside, and the exploitative tactics that most agencies will take because they want someone that represents the community, want access to the community, but none of their systems are set up in a way that will support people who are from different communities. And that leads to like burnout and just exploitative mining in our communities. And I can tell tons of stories of lots of folks on the reservation who are, that's just typical, right? And then the downside of that is I want to be able to access my community and work with them in this way. And then I'm an outsider sometimes, you know, so I'm an outsider, insider, and it's a very fine line to be able to walk. But it's something that's not unfamiliar to me as a two-spirited person. So navigating something like that is extremely difficult, but it has to be done with care. And I don't think most agencies understand that fully.
Right.
I don't have much to add except there's also an inside outside in medicine too, where it feels like, you know, the same things where people are emphasizing diversity and DEI efforts, but often the emotional labor falls on BIPOC people, and you know they're not actually moving very much. They're kind of putting faces up as sort of progress, and so I think it can be two-sided. But you know, I think in my work, I've used my experiences to kind of relate to the immigrant experience. I moved to this country when I was young, when I was 8. And so I've also felt kind of in between cultures and really trying to find my own identity in that. And so I know the struggle of like wanting to fit in, but not quite, and also not wanting to lose what it means to be you and your culture, while also trying to stay connected to this new culture. So so use some of that in different settings with people I work with. And also I think I've been in therapy, I've been a patient, so using my experience of what it feels like to be on the other side, who listens to me, who doesn't, is my pain taken seriously, you know, those types of things. I can use that to sort of advocate for or help people that I work with advocate for themselves. So so I think it's two-sided.
Absolutely. Okay, if no one has anything to add, I'll move on. But if you have something to add, yes, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think the inside and outside stance, sometimes it's for us as practitioners, it's always a struggle, right? It's always a challenge to straddle, but that's exactly why we're here for me. And listening to all of you thus far has been inspirational. For me, it's sort of being part of this group or groups like this that helps me realize that I'm not the only one in and out of my community. So, you know, being part of the cisgender female Vietnamese American intersectionality, my intersectionality gives me, like, it helps me bypass certain starting points when I work with my community, right? But it also is really important, like Dr. Escarano is talking about, which is to be conscious of not ourselves exploit our communities, because we are standing on shoulders of folks before us in our community, right? And we're also representing our community to advocate for change. And that's a big responsibility. But the thing is, as long as we recognize it, and as long as we approach it with compassion. So for me, the experience, my own lived experience, helped me tap into the empathy quickly. But I also have to be very conscious and cautious of not over-identification or place my own expectations on my community and or get burnt out. So it's you know, a constant self-care. And I think a message for students that who are listening, stepping into this field, is self-care is really important. But that inspiration about giving to your community is really also important to hold on to, so that it could keep us with our stamina, right? So that we can continue the work we do, because it's really needed.
Listening, taking mental notes. Yes. So the next question is about how various statistics show that 80% or more of mental health providers are in fact white. So what can we do as BIPOC providers to attract more BIPOC providers to the field?
Sorry, I have to jump in because I want to say money. We, especially during the pandemic, I think to really recruit and retain BIPOC practitioners, we need the system to recognize what it takes, the extra effort, whether it's the language, writing, like conducting the session in one language, writing the notes in English, and then the various nuances, the advocacy, the extra case management, the extra steps for us to really advocate for our client populations. And it's just not being recognized in the billing system, in the financial structure. So I think it's a really important recognition that it takes extra effort, and we need to find ways, very concrete ways, to reward those BIPOC practitioners, especially new ones entering the field, because it's costly, right? Their education. And then I'm going to combine it with your next question, which is talking about institution. We have to have a support. We have to have a support system for students, for new workers. And that support is multiple ways, multiple levels. It's listening and being there and to recognize, exactly as Dr. Eric says, you know, even the workers themselves have to work through the rerouting, right? And recognizing our own colonization in our own life experience. And that's extra work. And as teachers, supervisors, we have to support the new students and new staff and help support them through that process, so that they can turn around and give to whatever communities that we expect them to work in.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think we're in a moment of people turning to mental health and therapy, and really just kind of this big surge of talking about mental health. But I think we definitely can do more with stigma in our own communities around mental illness. I remember when I wanted to go into psychiatry, people thought I was going to be reading minds. Only partly true, but but you know, it's sort of having those conversations within our families, within our communities about what we do and why it matters and why it's important. And I think that can sort of help maybe start conversations. I'm not sure how many of us have been in conversations where it's mental health is something you talk about in your family and behind closed doors, if even, and no one outside. And so I think it's really kind of opening that up. And even if it means, because I do worry about the surge of people seeking therapy and maybe they don't find people that actually can relate to their experience or help them, if they're, you know, majority white practitioners out there. So really kind of helping those who are seeking mental health treatment or therapy to those people that are trustworthy and kind of in the community, but also kind of decreasing the stigma so more people go into it and it becomes more of an open conversation we're having in our cultures.
Really.
Yes. So actually, one of the things that I love doing is making sure that we have design, but this is such a multifaceted response. So I'm gonna try to just reel down. I am a very small percentage what it would be considered successful, right? And the percentage only gets smaller the higher in education that I have gone. And I'm not going to go into the weeds of my entire life. If you like to know more information, please feel free to contact me, right? But I will say that the smaller the percentage, the little rewards are not there. I would also argue, Dr. Huang, that it's not necessarily about self-care. It's really about boundaries. I think often ideologies around, I wrote an op-ed a few years ago about that, what is it, imposter syndrome. I don't subscribe to that because it's fake. It's all of these particular things, right? And I would hear self-care, and there's a lot of historical trauma that has not been addressed in supporting students culturally, right? And putting them in situations that they probably wouldn't have been here. I have never understood higher education until I was in the throes of it. And I was struggling trying to understand what it looked like until I got it, right? And so in designing what that looks like, the support needs to be able to address historical trauma, making sure that it's culturally appropriate, that institutions are moving and not being like firm in what their systemic racism and other isms that are perpetuated through education academia. And additionally, just like having other systems set up for internships that are appropriately culturally, because it was difficult for me with all of the stuff that I was coming with to be able to go somewhere and say, I specialize in this already off the bat and have a placement for that. So it's just like having a placement, being able to participate in school, having support, redesigning, being more innovative when it comes to curriculum and curriculum-based education and what that looks like, and having those particular pathways really affirmed in a way that are not necessarily punitive. I think we drive, especially for those who are BIPOC, they often suffer from having to bend over backwards to be able to just be competent, right? And I can't even tell you how many times people just say, oh, that's not it, right? The level of where like cisgender white men can just easily go be mayonnaise, right? Go and do basic bare minimum, and it's no good, right? So I often, some folks maybe from BIPOC communities say, I'm tired, I don't want to have to keep educating. I will always be there to educate, because look at what have they come up with so far. It's not good, right? So like it's a wherewithal. So I think giving reprieve in these education circumstances for folks to just grow personally, and having additional mentors, and not have the aim to be, I want more doctors, I want more people in higher education, I want people in power in those particular conversations, because oftentimes we have peer educators and advocates, and not to say that those are wrong, but it's, again, for me, from my perspective, I just only see that as more mining in our community and keeping people at a lower level of accessing mental health services. And we really need to encourage folks to go higher. I have been stirred away often to not go into a route that I'm in currently. It was, oh, you should just do this. You should just do this. And it was never, go be that CEO, go be that doctor. It was always like, you can probably land here. And so I think we need more support in being able to process historical trauma for students just to be able to access mental health care. And the more that we kind of sift out those systems and infrastructures, the better we will see results and the more appealing it would be, because it was just unsafe for me to go to most of these schools and have to continually and exhaustively have to educate them about my communities. They'd close the books and they're done for the day. I would go home and that was my life.
Right. Well said.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you, everyone, for your perspectives, and Dr. Scareño for sharing your experience and a bit about your journey and the challenges. I think I resonate with a lot of what you said in terms of, as me being the first in my family to go to college and just struggling with starting out, as an undergrad, even in El Paso, Texas, where maybe 75% of the population were Mexican immigrant or Mexican American. I still felt isolated because I didn't have the experience of talking about, some of the issues and the academics. And then, in terms of the undergraduate population might have been diverse and mostly representing the region. There was students from Juarez that would cross the border, but these were students that were, the privileged sort of upper class Mexican students that could afford, and could go to, get an undergraduate education at the University of Texas at El Paso. But as you move on to graduate school and faculty, the graduate students were from outside, were from somewhere else. The faculty, were also not representative of the region, of the community. So it was a struggle, starting very early on in the process of, academia, and kind of adapting to all of that process. And then, I've, I guess, come to a point where now I feel that my journey has given me the insights to maybe share my story and be vulnerable in spaces with young people, and kind of, so then they see that they don't just see me as someone with a PhD and that I have all the knowledge and everything understood, but there's a lot of stuff that I keep on learning. Right now at this space, I'm learning a lot. And something to share about, like, how our institutions and universities are not set up to really support students coming from our communities that have gone through a lot, that there's historical trauma and current issues that are happening, and it's, in some cases, it's getting worse, unfortunately, because of the political divisions and threats to our democracy and so forth. Within my own professional society of the Society for Community Research and Action, which is a part of the American Psychological Association, there's people that are calling for change and for our group that already is sort of focused on social justice to be even more critical, right? So then to be more critical community psychologists, not just community psychologists, but critical community psychologists, where we're challenging even ourselves to improve our society and the spaces that we create for the younger generations that are coming up, and supporting them, because a lot of people don't feel supported, and that sort of happened a lot, during the pandemic. A lot of people were like on the listserv going back and forth and communicating their disappointment and the tensions and the need for them to feel that they were voicing that they weren't getting that support even within our own society, right? But there's movement towards changing that, and there's a lot more representation within our society and to improve that. And so that's not even considering including the American Psychological Association, which is this mega, sort of professional organization that in many ways ends up creating a lot of policies that in different ways influences how mental health is done. Then the challenges that mental health practitioners have, or students, in terms of feeling that, the approaches are not really rooted or reflecting, the true needs and the strengths of the communities. And then the American Psychiatric Association, similar, I think, just to mention, like last year, both of them came up with, or they issued an acknowledgement, an apology for contributing to structural racism. I'm thinking American Psychiatric Association in January of last year, and then the American Psychological Association in October of last year. And these are organizations that have been around for over 100 years, and part of that, I think my understanding is that came from practitioners and researchers of color that pushed for that, that did that work. And it wasn't necessarily the white researchers or practitioners. Some of them, I guess the allies, and you have a question on allies, I think that you might ask later, but it's really the work that sort of to push for social justice and to create new approaches for mental health is like on the backs of a lot of us, and it's really to try to change the systems, and I think it's needed. So we do need for people to feel like they can go all the way to the highest level, and to be able to have the opportunities and resources to help communities and in the best way possible. But we need there to be the support along the way to understand how they are, we're struggling with like being able to feel like we are supported, and we sometimes feel like we're insiders or outsiders in different places, and yeah. So I think it's there's a need for really a lot of kind of rethinking the systems at different levels, professional organizations, mental health systems, higher education. So
let's get into that. So the next question is about allyship and how in contemporary circles that means, allyship means white people should step up and do their part, right, to advance, to I guess combat white supremacy and advance the interests of historically marginalized communities. So how do y'all see that? How would you feel, or how would you like to see allyship demonstrated among providers or colleagues or art agencies who aren't a part of the BIPOC community? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So yeah, I'm a very direct person. I don't really like allyship very much. It's not a very good meter, right? I think everyone can just slap a sticker on and be like, I'm an ally, right? And then their actions say otherwise. And so I really look for accomplices. And I know some people are going to say like, wow, that's a negative connotation. And let's look at the reality of policing and laws that have been historically discriminatory. And allyship really was accomplishing, breaking the laws in order to make sure that we have corrected them. Those laws don't exist today, or they're bringing them back. It just depends on the circumstances. And again, if left to their own devices, I think it's one thing to how you frame that question is, yes, white folks need to process themselves and manage themselves, because I'm not going to manage them in that way and try to make them feel better about processing those things. But I'm not going to also just give them the reins to like, go fix it. Those are two different things. And, we'll sit at the table. I think oftentimes folks overstep in like allyship, and I'm an ally, and let me include that in the LGBTQIA, and that's not the A, right? Like that ism is not meant for them, because the system is not. Being part of a group that has been marginalized, is experiencing the isms, is not necessarily the same thing as, well, I was there. That's not the same thing. And so I get really cross when I hear people saying like, oh, that's also my experience. It's not the experience. The experience is that the hope is how accomplices are really taking action in legislation, in community building, in leaving the space and saying, you please, we're going to finance you. We're going to put you in positions where you can create these things. We want you to do that. Because often what ends up happening is, let's do a focus group. Give us all of your ideas. And it still comes out like, forgive me for saying this, trash. The best thing that, again, they're trying to figure out how to do it, right? Do it themselves. And that's just exploitative. I'm going to give them the same kind of recipe, but it's not going to be the homemade cooked meal that I understand, right? So it's they don't have that finesse because they're not connected in that way. So it's really it's showing up to help, accomplish this, and then also being able to just remove themselves in spaces where we need to create these additional things and create those support networks.
Absolutely. And I think they, I think, can ally with other white people and sort of change the needle among their community as well. And I wanted to add, in academic spaces, I think there should be more acknowledgement, more space for what we term non-dominant bodies of knowledge, but just making space for indigenous knowledge, cultural knowledge, storytelling, and it goes back to that evidence-based medicine or evidence-based practice point, which is, even though things don't have evidence behind it, like who did the research, who did they include in their studies, and we go back, and science has had a very kind of strong white supremacy in it, and so it's including those things that we have cultural knowledge about, or just ancestral kind of evidence, and including them as part of our knowledge as well. So I think allyship should go more than sticking a sticker on or just claiming that you are, but really kind of making space for other kind of people, knowledge, and just broadening the boundaries of what we know to be true.
Yes, 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 everything that you both said. And can I add decision making? Putting the right people at the table to make important decisions for that community. So it's got to be people from that community to make decisions, rather than, like Dr. Escarano said, just a focus group. So getting people to the decision table is really important. Hiring practice needs to change. And then at the very personal level, it's not about, oh, I see your point, or I have knowledge of your point. It's about being with and really accepting who I'm with at a personal level, rather than sort of say, oh, I see that, I see the viewpoint, I see different viewpoints. It's beyond the cognitive.
Yeah, I totally agree with what everyone is saying. And I think it's utilizing the power and the privilege, and not just talking about it like lip service, but actually then creating opportunities for the younger generation coming up. And what we're talking about, having the resources and support for them to be able to feel like, there's people that genuinely are doing something to support their mental well-being as they're getting trained, as they're doing the research. So whether it's at universities or professional societies, white folks that can truly, have colleagues that are white, and they're I don't necessarily would think that they refer to themselves as allies, but they don't use that term. It's really, they're not about the language, but it's about the actual practice, what they're doing to support. And I see it, them, whether it's reaching out to me and checking on in terms of how I'm doing, and supporting me as I'm developing a proposal for a grant, or my ideas for my work with youth-centered mental health, and that kind of stuff. And then really being sort of very mindful in terms of how people utilize that, these opportunities where there's a need for addressing issues of systemic racism, and in medicine there's a lot of terms being used like equity and health equity and cultural competency and stuff like that. And sometimes it's used to kind of for the institution, right, to get resources or to show that there are making movements towards that. And then people like in the research world, like competing for grants. I was reading about, some areas where these topics are, there's a need for addressing issues of health equity and systemic racism, but it's still the white researchers that are, have a lot of grants that are applying for those opportunities. And, this was actually, I think, an article written by a young scholar of color that was arguing for, for us to be very mindful and careful of how these opportunities, whether in the research world, the practice world, that we offer these opportunities of grants and to build your career, and then in ways that that the people that are genuinely coming from it in a genuine way, that they really want to help the communities, as opposed to someone taking advantage of that opportunity to apply for get yet another grant and get additional money for the universities, right, that are competing for these grants that are limited in supply. And then they sort of builds their career and get some more publications, but whether that knowledge and from the research is actually utilized, not necessarily like evidence-based, but utilized in a way that to help promote, the goals of communities and their needs, that is another question, something that we have to be very, thoughtful about.
Very true. Very true. So I think this might be the last question we have time for, at least from my questions. But it is one that I'm really interested in seeing your answers to, or hearing your answers to, because it pertains to me. But in what ways can universities and other learning institutions help support the mental well-being of their students, especially students in the healthcare field who are going to be frontline workers and maybe potentially are already, on the front lines volunteering at spaces?
I just have 3 points that I wrote down. One is financial wellness. I think this is a long road for a lot of people, and a lot of marginalized populations have unfortunately been stuck in poverty because of policies. And so I think even just to think about going to school for this long is, prohibitive for some people. So there has to be some grants or scholarships, or people just deciding as a policy that we are going to make education accessible and free for everybody, and we really want this as the end point is we get more people as part of the people working in this field. So that's the first point I wanted to make. The other is, as we've been talking about, I think we really need to support people's identity and belonging in these spaces, because that hasn't happened. And so when we talk about professional identity and personal identity, I think students in this field really need to see themselves growing into who they are and not into this ideal of who they should be in these spaces. So really supporting their own development of identity. And sort of related to that, I think we're not quite where we should be in terms of how we navigate systems, and we really need to help those who aren't used to things that are prohibitive and kind of restrictive know how to navigate those systems. And I think this is sort of a final point, but I think as a field, we just need to be more focused on prevention. How do we prevent trauma from happening in communities? How do we prevent people from getting ill in the first place? And really a lot more research and support in that area.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just think like free, yes, free education, being able to, so because it's so large and complex, there are going to be multiple entry points and how to address some of these things. We need to triage people who are currently experiencing trauma, right? And we need to be able to identify what historical trauma, and also for folks who have had historical benefits to that trauma and what that looks like. We also need to be able to support and create curriculum and curricula to really be culturally appropriate, and then also just not like storytelling in a way that is obstructive or even preventative in being able to have personal growth. Ideally, we need to be able to have more research that is supporting this ideology. And as we start to increase the workforce within BIPOC communities, we'll titrate some of the other workers to go focus on their own stuff, right? Like, and again, whiteness is not bad, but the construct of whiteness is like, go do, right? The whole like, go do with you, and we can do together, and we can learn from each other and how to practice that without being appropriative in a way that, people are like, let's teach you yoga, like, no, don't do that. Like, it's some of these things that are practices in education that we have a very flawed system of, like, it's almost like a rat race, like, get those good grades and get all these things, instead of really like, did you really learn how to utilize these skills to be able to take back to your community and work with them? And so I understand that it's really important to be able to have grades and how to be able to showcase some of these things, but we also pay attention to and subscribe to things that are punitive, right? Like, did you attend class, and are you an adult enough? And like, well, like, some of those things aren't important. Did you learn how to provide care this way? And so I just think an overhaul of our system in general is probably going to be necessary. But in order to make that tangible, I think it would really be more of like identifying key points and providing positive disruption in how we are providing these particular educational pathways, and then really providing support in communities who have not had the access to be able to have equitable and very sustainable ways to get to their careers. And then also, like, the ending secrecy, like, we're not living in this world of like, oh, well, we know we're the same community and we're really, you know what I mean? Like, no, I'm very plain when it comes to being able to have these same conversations. Some institutions don't like that. Some institutions love that. But it's going to remain the same, right? Because I'm not going to live in the dark anymore of like having to be able to live and grieve myself and suffer, and then like bring along and say that to my community, well, we have to do it this way in light of them. We're in an enlightened period of being able to say these institutions have not worked. It's always been not worked for us. It's always been in the benefit of others. And so by subscribing to secrecy and not being able to announce what those things are, absolutely not. So yeah, I will not go quietly in the dark.
Yes. We did have a question that came in that I'd love to be able to get to real quick if y'all are okay with it. Because it ties in with what we're already talking about. And it's how can students advocate for themselves against toxic and outdated teaching styles? We've been told to, quote, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, or we need to fall in line because that's how things are done. That's something my mom says all the time. So how can we advocate for ourselves? One thing I'd love to say is that, like, we should demand rest because we don't get enough. But I'd love to hear your thoughts quickly if you're able.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great question. It's something that I kind of, as a, currently teaching a class in psychology this summer, and, teaching other courses in the fall. And I struggle with that because sometimes if, I ask myself, am I contributing to these, creating these perpetuating the system? And I think I do in some cases, right? To be honest, I sort of get stuck in those ways, and I try to grow, right? This is where you recognize and you acknowledge, sometimes, I didn't do a good job of creating those spaces, opportunities to really, check on the students and see how they're doing, not just kind of say, oh, you didn't attend and stuff like that. I think there's sort of the class norms and policies and stuff like that that are also based on what the university's kind of requires. And I think there's always a tension around that, and there's a need to, I think, for students, if they're not doing well, like their well-being, or they have their own personal struggles and just issues, experiences with trauma, and how are they going to be able to focus and do well academically and study? It's just not gonna happen, right? It's going to be tough. And so we don't do a good job of really kind of just getting to know them and talking with them when, and understanding, where they're at, who they are, and then having that conversation. So I try to do that. I reach out to the students and check how they're doing, and then really kind of then have that conversation, and then sort of then adapt some of my assignments or the ways that I approach the teaching to create more spaces where they can contribute to the discussion. And it's not just me like testing them. I let them use the study guide. If they took time to do, for example, to think through, and it's not just memorizing stuff, but actually learning, and then utilizing that as a tool to be able to take a test, for example, something as simple as that, or just asking them like, how is this going, and learning constantly, because I think I've failed, and I recognize that I've done that. I'm learning still. I'm growing as an instructor, as a professor, because I'm within the system, right? Sometimes I do other approaches where I try to like create new opportunities to have conversations, and I mentor students from King Drew, from the high school, and it's a lot about like conversation and kind of seeing where they're at, what they're interested in, and design a project that they're interested in, not because it's, I'm interested in that, but maybe it fits with mental health, but then like with the spin in terms of what their research goals and what they want to do ultimately, and in the future. So just this conversation and dialogue, understanding, recognizing, accepting that we're within these systems and we're not perfect, but growing, and then finding, and then learning from each other and from colleagues, and reaching out to to other faculty, and sort of learning like what they're doing, and how I can get better.
Yeah. To echo that, could I just kind of make a push for the students to self-advocate, to really reach out to the instructor that they're in that course, right? But they also, unfortunately, they're still functioning in institutions where not everybody is safe for the disclosure, or not everybody creates the space for the student to be open and honest about, this is what my challenge is, or what this is my barrier. So I would encourage students to not only reach out to the instructor that they're in the class, but also identify other instructors that they come across who may be supportive of their process in a safe way, and build that, keep that relationship going. And even in this, they can consult with that safe instructor and say, I'm in this situation. Do you have recommendations about approach and ways that I would frame this for my current instructor? So I've had a lot of students who've done that over the years, sort of email me and say, I'm not in your class anymore, but help me frame this. Because unfortunately, we still have to frame things a certain way so that the others can hear it and they can like support us, right? So but it's a dual process, and they whoever they find who's safe and supportive, they should hold on to that person for the rest of their institutional career, like in those 2 years or whatever number of years, because that those will be their allies. So hopefully people will look out for those.
And the rest of their lives. I mean, I'm here because of mentors who, if I had any bootstraps, it would be them. It's really what's made the difference. So
Now we're the shoulders for others.
I would just simply say, what would work in my classroom when I'm teaching others, it's not going to apply to some of those toxic folks, right? Also the minutia work that's like, we don't need that, right? People are working, people are busy, people need to have their lives. And also like that work balance thing, right? And people would come in my class and say, oh, I didn't miss this day. And okay, great. Doesn't matter. That points are not taken off. I don't care. But that attitude is not necessarily going to be for the next person. And so really an advocacy is always ask questions, always come from on a mind of curiosity. How is this not working? And that diffuses a lot of people. I can disarm people all the time because I've had to navigate lots of systems that would tell me, oh, well, that's the rule. And I have to justify my life being a person of color always, right? So then I started to get in the habit of, can you tell me why I needed in order to do this, right? And in a very polite way, because then politeness is super important, right? And oftentimes they may not even understand that system themselves. And it may also kind of rethink how they're constructing that particular class. Challenge people, always challenge people, challenge your professors, ask questions. They'll hate it. And mind you, there are probably 30 to 40 people that are going to probably participate in that class, given whatever kind of subject it is. So that there's also additional work, which is why I don't like minutia or just like busy work, because that means more grades and more papers that I have to be able to have to like look over. And then again, it's more about the content, about how you're using those processes. If there's a professor that is continuing to be like isms, right? Know that you can probably go to any administrator and file an actual report against them and say, hey, these are some things that's not okay. If you have disabilities, if you need access, there are other systems that are in place. And again, this is the unfortunate part. You have to go out, right? And like, how can you get that support from people? And advocating for yourself, it's really, again, from a mind of know that you'll be tired, you'll be frustrated, and these systems are meant and designed to be against you. But know that if you keep up, if you keep with that perseverance, you will prevail over those things. It's exhausting. Yes, I understand. But know that if you just keep going, question always, because they may not necessarily be right. And by simply questioning, they may start to understand how they need to shift their perspective, because they're not coming from your perspective. They're coming from their perspective with a solution that works for them. So always question, always ask for a justification of why that exists, and then always ask for accommodations that are for you. And it's okay to always ask for accommodations. I'm a very big advocate when it comes to accommodations in general. So, and if you don't get them, make a report. Absolutely. We don't need more educators that are perpetuating the isms that are kind of just supporting our infrastructure. And we can always change. Everyone has a different idea of how we can change. It's not overnight. And yes, like who isn't part of this isms, right? We all were raised with these isms, whether we are of color or not. I still have misogyny in me. I still have heterocentrism. I have all of these things, right? Colorism, right? They told me I needed to be white. How many times I couldn't rub this off of me. That ideology is from the colonizers that come often, and they just we just continue it by ourselves. The more we challenge those ideologies, the more we question it, the more we'll start to realize the leash that they're holding us on is held by ourselves at some point. And then we can start to create meaningful disruption based off of that.
Snaps all around, yes. Thank you all so much for your very thoughtful and well said answers.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to meet all of you.
Thank you.
Yes.
So much learning.
Yes, thank you. I'm so inspired and re-energized by listening to all of you and your responses. It's just very illuminating and exciting to hear. And I think, one question we didn't get to, but I think was answered throughout this discussion was, what does the future look like in these fields? And I think all your answers kind of touched on how we can build that future to be more open and accessible to BIPOC communities, not only accessing services, but also becoming providers of these services. So I just want to thank you all so much for taking the time out to be here with us. It's truly appreciated, and I look forward to continuing to work with you. I think hopefully I've opened a door and we can continue to partner and work together in changing this field and changing this area and having more students be welcomed. And just a note to any students watching, if you need someone to help you, advocate for yourself in the classroom, or you don't know where to go for accommodations, you can always reach out to my department, Shaw. So you can email us at shaw@cdrew.edu. So that's SHAW@cdrew.edu. And so even if it's, accommodations isn't something I can provide, but I can get you connected to who does provide that. So if at any point you're lost and you don't know who to reach out to, I encourage you to reach out to Shaw. Even if it's something as simple as, hey, I don't know how to bring this up to a professor, can you help me? We'd be happy to help you with those kinds of things. So just want to throw that out there for any students. And again, just a big, huge thank you to all of you. We really appreciate you being here today.